dive in. So when I saw that AIGA was looking for more speakers, my whole thought was that, you know, if I can help to build one single skill for designers around the city, then the whole community will be better for that. And I think that's something we should all kind of look to doing. Like if you feel like you have a skill that you can help everybody with, just like host a little small event and let's all talk about it and build up the community, right? Cool. We'll start with a quote from Ellen Lupton. So Ellen says that choosing and combining typefaces requires knowledge of how and why letter forms have evolved. We're going to get into that a little bit more, but obviously what this means is that we can just study a chart like this for hours on end and we'll be masters of type pairing, right? That's, no, not this. Can we just like, you know, shuffle through our font library and just kind of pick a couple things we like and stick them together? No, we can't do that. I'm not even gonna get into this. So what is type pairing? Anybody? No one knows what type pairing is. You're in the right place if you don't know. All right, so basically type pairing is the art of choosing and combining typefaces for a desired effect inside of a user experience or whatever kind of brand identity that we're building. So the way that we choose these things is going to be based on commonalities or contrast, all those things, some of the strengths of the typefaces. So that's things that we want to keep in mind when we're combining typefaces. It can be deeper than just I like this and this and we put them together, right? Essentially, type pairing is ingredients with a recipe, okay? To illustrate this, I'm going to tell you a little story. You love fried chicken. You love it so much, you eat it with coleslaw like 3 or 4 times a week, okay? Knowing this, your best friend invites you down to Germantown one night, and after walking around for a while, she says, hey, let's go have dinner at this crowded pub over here. And there it is. Chicken and waffles with a side of maple aioli. The chefs took something ordinary and made it unexpected. As designers, this is our job. And so essentially, you can look at type pairing kind of like chicken and waffles. So why do we need to understand type pairing? You're killing me, Smalls. All right, Austin. If it doesn't look good, nobody cares. That's it. You're right. That's it. End of talk. If it doesn't look good, nobody's going to care about it. So a few reasons that you need to remember is that you know, building a type system and the type pairing can kind of come before all of your color palette and the design elements and all these things. So building the type system is foundational to a brand identity or user experience. So that's really going to come before everything. So start with this, and the rest that builds on top of it is really going to be solid. Also, an interesting type system is going to entice the readers, and studies show that it will actually improve comprehension. If you use the right typefaces in the right way, people are going to remember more, and they're going to retain that knowledge. It's going to be more engaging, which is really impactful. Hey, you can charge for it, right? We're all looking for that, right? Every skill is billable, okay? So add this to your repertoire. This should be part of your process, and when you do this, it's going to add hours. You're going to bill for those hours, right? All right. Anybody know the answer to this one? Committee appointed to design the King's Alphabet in 1693 was comprised of which of the following? A cartographer, 2 professors, and an architect, 2 priests, an accountant, and an engineer, or 2 type designers, an engineer, and the king himself, Bill Murray. Anybody got an answer for this one? Take a guess. You said B first. It's B! And you're gonna get an old Doppelganger sticker. There you go. All right, so let's start pairing, okay? So a few of the steps that I kind of follow when I'm starting to build a type system involve finding a common thread. So find some commonality that these typefaces share. Usually that'll bind them together. We're gonna talk about some of those commonalities. Embrace differences. So this is about contrast, but also about knowing the strengths of each typeface. You know, how can one fill in where the other is lacking, so they can kind of both build each other up. Establish rules, ingredients with a recipe, right? Without the recipe, this whole thing just devolves into chaos. All right, let's go. So some of the commonalities we're going to look for, classification, serif, sans serif, script, you all know the drill, right? That's always going to be a good way to either bind or divide typefaces. Sometimes a designer can help you keep some typefaces looking similar if the designer has a certain distinctive style. That can be a way to help you pair some typefaces. Era and origin, if they were created in the same time period, that can make a difference. But also origin, keep in mind that, you know, just because a typeface wasn't created in 1910 doesn't mean that it wasn't created inspired by typefaces of that era. So it can be when it was created or also where it's inspired from. Proportions. So that's always a winner. If you can pair it with proportions, that can pretty much hold your type pairing together regardless of any of the other characteristics or commonalities. So when combined typefaces, we're trying to create a unique personality, right? If it's on brand or what is the brand, what are we trying to say here? It's important to remember that each face is going to affect the other one's tone. So when you put two things together, they have an effect on each other, right? So the way one might look by itself in a vacuum is not the way that it's going to look when it's beside something that's different than it, or the same. One tip whenever I'm starting with a type system, I always start with body copy. If that's not part of your process, that's cool. But for me, if you have solid body copy, it's going to help you, build a foundation for everything to come. So we're going to go face to face with Gill Sans. So kind of familiarize yourself with Gill Sans. It's pretty classic. It's subtle, but modern enough. It's not as bland as something I would argue is something like a Gotham or Helvetica. It's got some humanistic tones, yeah. This kind of lower X height. Some of the curves, it's very humanistic and comfortable, I would say. Look at a few options. Gill Sans and Albertus Nova was created last year for screen use, so that's good. We're going to think about that later in our strengths. Proportions, these have very similar proportions, a lower X height, and some of the humanistic lines. Technically, they're not the same classification. Albertus is technically a serif, even though it's really these kind of swelling, sharp ends of the stroke. Yeah, so that could be a good option. They were created within 3 years of each other. There you go, you've got that. So a couple commonalities to pull from, but we're going to keep moving. We're going to look at some other options. Gill Sans ENGRAVERS GOTHIC. So what's interesting about these is they were not created in the same era, but ENGRAVERS GOTHIC, being created in 1990, was created to look like a lot of the engraved typefaces that were created in like the 1930s era, when that was really popular. They're both sans serifs, so if you're looking for two sans serifs, that's a winner, right? So Gill Sans and Perpetua, this is kind of a trifecta, right? So same designer, they were created, both of them, I think within like a year of each other. Also, this kind of low X height humanistic feel. Both of these, these things are about as close as it gets to the same typeface without being the same typeface. Nowadays, you have these super families where you can get a serif and a sans serif or a slab serif all in the same font. It's created that way. Wasn't like that back then, but Eric Gill kind of did it anyways, right? We're gonna run with that. So let's look at some of the personality traits that we're getting from each one of these. You could argue that Gill Sans looks a lot more subtle next to like a Perpetua, which looks pretty elegant and contemporary for a serif, but still classic compared to this modern sans serif. I'm going to dig in a little bit more. You can see some of the mechanics of this. We're not going to get too deep into it, but this will help you, as you kind of lay it out and get it all in front of you, get all the information, and say what matches up, what doesn't match up. And contrast is great too, so we're going to get into that next. What do you say? Want to add one more to it? Yeah? All right. Something to spice it up a little bit? Oh, I hope somebody hates this. All right. So how about Gill Sans, Perpetua, and Rakkas? Anybody ever heard of Rakkas? All right. Me neither. Austin has, because he's heard me do this. Okay, so Rakkas is a Google font. There's only one weight. Okay, no italics is one weight. So very difficult, right? We're going to do it anyways. So you can see kind of when you put all these together, again, it's going to shift the personality a little bit more. How delicate does Perpetua look? It looks a little bit more luxurious. They both have this, humanistic tone, all of them kind of a lower X height. You can see that our matching system triples as soon as you add one more typeface, because you're kind of going A and B, A and C, and B and C. see where those match up. What's our common thread? Proportion. There you go. So we're going to keep moving with this, knowing that's not a versatile typeface, right? But I think these two can fill in the gaps. And again, you can see some of the mechanics if you really wanted to dig deeper. One way to do this is to kind of do it like a Venn diagram, and know that while these may share other commonalities, there needs to be one common thread. And also, say you're building a type system that has 5 or 6 typefaces in it, which is fine. If you can do that, I mean, you're juggling a lot of balls there, but you can do it. It's not necessary to have a common thread throughout all 6 typefaces. Then you're just going to basically create a bunch of the same looking stuff, right? So you can kind of branch this off, you know, kind of think of it like this kind of amorphous blob. Hey, we found a common thread. We've created a type system with just one commonality. And you can see that you're probably going to end up using Rakkas as a display typeface, because what else is it good for, right? You can see we started with a body copy. I said Gill Sans could be the body copy. These are kind of interchangeable. It just depends what you're looking for. So one thing we didn't go through that we're going to go through in the next section is defining roles. How are we going to use each one of these, right? How are they going to look on, you know, when we start to set them in type. Which of these is a humanist typeface? First one gets a sticker. Who said that? You said it? Okay. You're right. That didn't work. I was hoping that would go. No, it didn't happen. That's all right. Yeah, so it's got this kind of light and open, organic feel. Really low X height. It's been called ribbon-like italics. So one thing that's interesting about Jensen is while it may feel heavy to us on the page, when it was created in the late 1400s, it was created in contrast to black letter or Old English, whatever you want to call it. So compared to black letter, this is very open and light on a page. You know. So we're going to learn to embrace some differences. So we're going to talk about creating contrast, learning what the strengths are of each typeface, and how we're going to put those together. Some of the differences we're going to build on. These two are making a reappearance, classification. More often than not, that is a contrasting aspect of a pairing. Also, era origin. If you do that on purpose, it can be a differentiating factor, but usually not too much. Strengths, that's a big one. So what does one typeface have that the other one doesn't? We're going to talk about that a lot. And the personality. You know, when you're trying to create a personality, how are these two things going to intertwine and also kind of just run alongside each other? When we're examining differences, we're going to create contrast, but also we're going to create contrast in type settings. When we create a type system, we need to know how it's going to work and how these typefaces are going to work with each other and also look different on a page or do different things. What's their purpose? How's it going to behave? And to do this, we're going to go face to face with Utopia. So let's familiarize ourselves a little bit with Utopia. It's a transitional serif. Anybody know what transitional serif means? Okay. Transitional serif is kind of, it's not this humanistic feel, right? It doesn't look like you just wrote it with a nib, but it's also a little bit thicker than like a Bethany, something really modern. The hairlines are thicker, but it does have a little bit more geometric feel to it. It's got this kind of rectangularity to it. Look a lot at like the A. It's pretty like squared off, right? It's firm, it sits heavy, even though it's elegant and formal. So these kind of things, when you're trying to think about pairing typefaces together, really just like make some kind of specimen and just look at it. Really dive in and be like, what is this? How does this feel to me? You know, writing out words with it helps. Like, how does this feel? You know, does this feel right? It wouldn't write. You know, you're not going to write Mad Max with Utopia. So let's find a mate to complement Utopia's strengths and also balance that elegant personality. Bring it back down to earth a little bit. But first, what do we need to do first? Before we embrace differences, we need to... I'll give you a sticker. If you get this, I'll give you a sticker. I'll give you a cup of coffee. All right, I'll give it to you. Find a common thread. Anybody? That's first. That's the number one thing. We just talked about that. Wake up, people. That's okay. You haven't had your coffee. So we're going to look at some commonalities here. Utopia Tiempos, both serifs, which can be difficult to do without clashing. So we're going to try not to clash with this, but they have very similar proportions. But one thing to remember, we're talking about strengths here, so we're looking more into the differences. Tiempos has a lot more weights to it. It can get a lot heavier and it can get a lot lighter than Utopia can. On the other side, Utopia has 4 optical weights. We'll talk about what that means, but they both have these kind of strengths. Realistically, you're probably going to want to add another sans serif to this, so we want something that can kind of stand on its own. Let's go with just 2 instead of 3 this time. The next, Utopia and Myriad, both created by Robert Slimbach in late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, I just don't like Myriad, so we're going to keep going with that. Universe. So just one commonality, proportions. These things have very similar proportions. None of these other things match up, which is also a good way to think about differences. When you're looking at creating contrast, the less commonalities you have, the more contrast you're going to be able to handle. So both kind of upright and rectangular. You've got this kind of Swiss appeal with also formality and elegance, right? So it's going to kind of bring it down. Look at how these work together and some of the personality traits. And you can see a little bit more if we get into the mechanics of it. So let's go back to differences now that we've found a common thread. I'm not going to quiz you on that one again. Okay, so classification, era, origin, strengths, and personality. We're going to go through each of these one at a time and just move on through because we have just one common thread, so we have some room for contrast. We're going to keep building that. It's a transitional serif, Utopia is. Technically, Universe is a realist sans serif. I've always heard it called a neo-grotesque, but whatever. Point is, different classifications. So we've got some contrast there. Era and origin, different places, different times, okay? Now here's an interesting point, is that Utopia and Universe both work great at display sizes. It's really just how you want it to look. If you want this to be really elegant and formal, maybe you're gonna use Utopia as your display. That's fine. Whatever this may be, we can keep moving. We'll talk about rules in the next section. But, so display kind of marked that off. The cool thing is, you're going to get a lot more visual texture out of Utopia with those serifs and then like the fluctuating stroke widths, obviously. Universe is going to feel a lot lighter on the page, which is good because Utopia, when you're setting it, it can feel pretty heavy. Now, I'll show you that in a minute. But the 4 optical sizes, does anybody know what an optical size is? So have you ever seen a typeface that has like Utopia display, Utopia subhead, caption, regular, right? So that's optical sizes, and I'll show you what that means. And then whereas Utopia doesn't have optical sizes, but it has a range of widths, right? I mean, you've seen Universe super condensed and it's like this, and then, it's like extra wide, bold. Here's an optical size. This is a display size, that's a caption. These are the same, and it's the same weight. So specifically look at like the A and the P. Look how much thicker it is. I mean, the hairlines are almost gone in caption because when it's 6-7 point, you still have to be able to read it. You can't have that stuff just falling away completely. So that's really useful when you're thinking about versatility in a type system. Universe, lots of widths, that's fun. Just depends on how you want to use it. And then personality, so we can see how these are kind of bouncing off of each other. Maybe you can even think of a brand that would match well with this. So we've learned to embrace some differences, right? You can see kind of an example of how this might look. Some of the things I was talking about, I mean, tiny little captions. You can see how Universe really is going to look a lot lighter on the page than Utopia. Some of these things, you can see how you might use those balance of widths and optical styles to kind of create a type system and build a personality. A landmark of Swiss style, Universe was released by which foundry in 1957? Deberny and Peignot, Haas type foundry, or Adobe type? Stickers. You raised your hand and you said B. You are wrong. Sorry, it's not. It's Deberny and Peignot. I'm sorry. That's what I wanted to happen, actually. I was setting you up. This is the Swiss type foundry. You're right, and it is actually owned by Haas. But when Adrien Frutiger released Universe, he was at Deberny and Peignot in Paris, France. It was back here. Oh wait, we're going forward. Whoops. You see. Spoiler alert. Yeah. There we go, y'all. It was hidden. Sorry. This is the last one, then we're gonna do a workshop. Okay, so establish rules, right? So we have our ingredients. What is the recipe? Jonathan Hoffler of Hoffler & Co. It's often the dialogue between typefaces that most effectively communicates how information is meant to be understood. So when we create this type system, we're telling people how to understand this content, whatever it is. You may know this, but Bethany Heck is a master, okay, of type pairing. This is incredible. Let's just absorb the complexity of this for a second. Okay. How many typefaces does she have here? Can anybody count them? Does anybody absolutely hate this? You can raise your hand, it's okay. No? Does anybody like, it's like the best thing they've ever seen in their life? They're kind of in the middle. It's okay. All right. Anyways, it is, right. Okay, so I would not, I mean, if you can find a client, you can talk them into this kind of stuff. This was a passion project of hers, so she didn't have to go through any approval process. But anyways, let's break it down. So you can see how many rules she's got within this, right? That's how she keeps this thing from being completely, chaotic. It does kind of look chaotic, but it's also controlled. Just 3 different heading styles, 4 subheadings, 2 body styles, and 4 accent typefaces, including what I'm pretty sure is Japanese. I don't know, somebody else can tell that. I don't have a clue. What is Gundam? Japanese? Anybody? Okay, Japanese. I don't know. Gundam's pretty cool, but I have no clue. Never worked with Japanese typefaces. So the point is she's established some rules. What's really interesting to me is that she's balanced something that could be very futuristic and robotic with some humanist typefaces. Like we talked about, some of the curves here. This is actually what's called a calligraphic serif. It's based off calligraphy. I mean, who puts that in something that literally could have just been a cloud of Futura? And also, maybe this is a rule, I have no idea. We'll go back and look at it, but this typeface is called Maelstrom. It's called a Castellan Italian. The stress is actually on the horizontals. So normal typefaces we see is the stress is on the vertical. That's how your eye reads. This flips it, right? So there's a lot of different typefaces like that. But what she's done is she turns the typeface in the composition so that the stress is still on the vertical, right? So it flows with the rest of it. Maybe that's a rule, who knows? I haven't talked to her about it. I need to call her. Okay, so the point is rules avoid chaos and it really allows for expansion. You could take that one piece and turn it into almost like a manual and build out any publication or website or anything you would really want just with those rules. All right, are you all ready for an experiment? You gotta get up, you gotta stand up. Literally, you have to stand up.